Hello everyone, apologies that I couldn't make the panel. As you will have heard, I was really quite unwell. Fortunately, I'm feeling much better now, so I'm able to give my talk to you today. So my talk is on climate science on YouTube, and specifically talking about climate deniers using memes and also using Trojan horses. And we'll get to what I mean by that in just a minute. So to give a little bit of background, I feel like I have to justify my inclusion on any kind of panel like this, not that we're on a panel anymore, just because I do clicomm for a living. I was once a scientist. Specifically, I studied stratosphere-troposphere coupling with Mark Baldwin and Dave Stevenson. If any of you have touched the stratosphere at all, you recognize this dripping paint plot. Basically, my research was looking at how the stratosphere, the middle layer of the atmosphere, impacted the lowest layer, the troposphere. And for what it's worth, I thought my thesis was kind of interesting. We showed that the interaction, the downward influence of the stratosphere on the troposphere was non-linear, and derived a quasi-geostrophic approach to that. So that's my academic justification for being here. And the reason that I was able to pursue that was because I studied physics at Oxford. And I bring that up because it's relevant not just for setting me up academically, but it allowed me to start, whilst I was an undergraduate, making videos and really pursuing two careers simultaneously during the PhD, which leads us on to how I fell. And I started making videos 10 years ago now. And originally that was to help applicants get into Oxford and Cambridge. So for those of you not from the UK, Oxford and Cambridge are very elitist institutions. There's a whole load of socioeconomic issues still tied up in the UK with admissions to Oxbridge. And I was a very unlikely applicant. I went to a state comprehensive school. No one in my family had been to university before. And so when I got into Oxbridge, I realized I had a very valuable perspective for kids who were applying from a similar background to me. And when I didn't get a huge amount of help and advice in applying from existing students because I just didn't know any, I decided to make some videos explaining, well, this is what my admissions process was like, and this is what life was like at the university. I made this YouTube channel from Simon Oxford Physics. Boy, do I regret that F. And I specialized, originally it was kind of FAQs, like this applying to Oxbridge and the physics interview questions. And eventually that became sort of academic video blogs or vlogs. And the whole point of this was to kind of give a boots on the ground perspective. It was to show what daily life at the university was like. And that was informed by the fact that I watched an awful lot of vlogs on YouTube at the time. I still do. And there was basically no content out there on YouTube at the time. Now there's a huge study tuber scene on YouTube. But at the time, I was the first one to do it, certainly for Oxbridge. And what I was trying to do was fill in that gap of what a actual current student to Oxbridge would the advice they give to someone who was applying if they just knew them as a friend. And these videos were for the people that just didn't happen to know those people because of how they grew up. And now this is my full-time job. I went full-time just after submitting my thesis, and I've currently got 277, sorry, there's a display behind me, 277,000 YouTube subscribers, and there's a selection of them here, mostly focusing on science literacy, sort of more of an emphasis on methodology rather than results, and specifically looking at climate. I also, just to mention, also do live streaming, which is why this setup is kind of as nice as it is, because I use this most days. There's an example streaming schedule down here on the screen. I also have a podcast, and I'm a jack of all trades. But primarily focused on doing scientific videos on YouTube. And the fact that I do climate on YouTube is, as a scientist, is kind of an anomaly. If you go onto a new browser and you just search for climate change, the top level videos that you will find are good. They contain scientific evidence. They follow the mainstream consensus. But the videos, what you could refer to as the secondary level videos that are in the suggested bar that you are recommended to watch after watching one of those top level videos, are not quite so scientific. Studies have shown, I'm sure most people here will have heard, that a lot of the YouTube videos, most of the YouTube videos on climate change don't represent scientific fact. They're mostly conspiracy theories. This is part of a wider trend that YouTube's algorithm basically radicalizes its users, and this is why it's a problem that we have secondary level videos of this form. Yeah, you might say that, well, if you search climate change and go on YouTube, you're going to get good information. You will, but then you get sucked down a rabbit hole of these increasingly extreme, increasingly ludicrous videos about climate conspiracy, whether that's chemtrails or and take your pick. There are people on this panel who know a lot more about this than I do. So in terms of why that is, you can really take your pick. Brandolini's law is probably a good one. Certainly here in the UK, there is definitely this attitude that was expressed with regards to Brexit by Michael Gove, that we've had enough of experts, and that there's this distrust of the man and the scientific process. And this is a much larger issue than I can ever do justice in this talk, but there are reasons why this is, and we are not alone in dealing with this problem. So when I started making climate content, this wasn't quite such a problem, but I also didn't do it very well. I approached making climate change videos in much the same way as an academic presentation, and basically doing short lectures to camera with a couple of graphics on this is a thing, this is how it works. And that culminated in me doing this crash course in atmospheric physics, which was a series of videos that I shot in the PhD office in the middle of the night when no one was around. And whilst I think they had good educational value, they just weren't suited to people that weren't researchers. I was approaching it as what kind of content would I like to watch, and I was not a representative member of the general audience on YouTube. I was doing a PhD in atmospheric physics, and so I turned to, realizing that this hadn't worked very well, I turned to my experience with making the academic video blogs, and what I refer to as the Blair Witch effect. So for those of you who don't know, the Blair Witch project was a 1999 horror film that was notably scary to people because it was framed, it was portrayed as found footage. This idea that these film students got lost in the woods researching this legend of the Blair Witch and disappeared, and then this footage was found. And the audience, when believing this to be true about the product, found it to be much scarier because it basically lowered their guard. It removed a bunch of preconceptions of the format and what they were expecting from this product. And the perception of an audience, the perception that the audience has of not just the content, but also the format of your chosen messaging is absolutely crucial. And this is just a very neat example of it, that people, I think, actually subconsciously chose to believe that it was found footage, even if they realized that it was probably a film, because it made it scarier. And I think a great number of people currently, a great number of young people, make the same kind of conscious choice to believe that something is authentic and shot in a certain way, that it has been shot in an authentic way, because it makes it more entertaining and because it's frankly requires less critical thinking. And as I've sort of done a whole TED talk on this, if you want to sort of look at my thoughts on this, and I say our, meaning the people under 30, and I'm just under 30, are the first generation who both consume and create the same format for the most part, which is online video. People create online video and send it on WhatsApp or on Snapchat or Instagram, or in my case YouTube, but also consume those things from their friends. And so when I was creating video blogs, what I was doing was effectively emulating a format that those people were used to seeing from their peers. It removed certain barriers. It removed some preconceptions that these people would have had otherwise about the content and about, when it came to doing video blogs about my PhD, about researchers and the scientific process. And it made me a human. It contextualized the research in within the bounds of a human life, which people then focused on. And the learning aspect of it, the science aspect, kind of snuck under the radar. It was basically science communication, but masquerading as banal entertainment. And it was effective. It got an awful lot of views and an awful lot of people got engaged. The crucial thing was that it appeared to be true. I'd love the word verisimilitude, this appearance of being truthful. And that appearance of being truthful was just enough to make people think, oh, I'm just watching a video from a guy, from just like any of the videos I watched from friends on WhatsApp. And it meant that they approached the content in a way without their guard raised, effectively. So continuing that idea, if I wasn't going to do video blogs because I wasn't a researcher anymore, I was now a full-time science communicator, I instead was aiming for the people who were stuck in this downward spiral of YouTube disinformation. And so that necessitated thinking about, right, well, what format would these people respond to well? What kind of format would they have their guard lowered, in response to, if they see? So I wanted to create videos that seemed to be exactly in keeping with that sidebar of shame on some of these climate change videos. And so making thumbnails like these and titling them in a very provocative way in what I refer to as Trojan horse videos, these videos that appear to be, oh, this is going to confirm my perception that scientists are morons and that the world isn't actually warming. But then when you get a couple of minutes in, you start to realize that actually, perhaps my preconceptions are wrong, but because they're coming from a format that these people inherently don't critique and trust, it is more successful. It seems to be more successful, certainly. And you know that it's a success when you get comments like, oh, I watched this thinking that this was going to be a great video, but it turns out it's just more science bullshit, stuff like that. The comments are a whole other problem. And I do this alongside more traditional science video essays. But the comments actually are one of the associated risks with this, because at the end of the day, when I make videos that get hundreds of thousands of views, the comments are just as high profile as the video itself. When people watch videos, they scroll down to the comments. Controlling what the top comments are is absolutely crucial to make sure that malicious actors and trolls and bots in some cases, ensuring that they don't hijack those top posts and are allowed to use this platform, this significant platform, to spread misinformation is one of the biggest things that keeps me up at night. YouTube fortunately does have really good moderating tools for exactly that purpose. And as you can see in the thumbnail at the bottom there, I actually have turned some of these comments into generating further content. I've actually been able to take some of this negative energy and actually convert it into, well, people have said this and this is what I have to say in response, and try and do a fact check. Quite how effective that is, I don't know. It's got quite a few views, but I'm not quite sure how much impact it's actually had on people that need their mind changed. So kind of to wrap up, so I realize I've been rabbiting on for a while. What is effective? If you want to do science communication when it comes to climate on YouTube specifically, what do you need to do? And I think there's basically three things. You need to be authentic. I think people's bullshit detectors are very finely tuned. As I said in an earlier slide, people's media literacy is much higher now than in previous generations because we create and consume much more media. And so people can see through an attempt to not be genuine, really. And that means that if you are going to go for this Trojan horse approach, you have to know that format very well. It has to be an authentic fake, if you like, before you open the hatch and the Greek soldiers of facts pour out. You had to be very careful that you know the format and you appear authentic if you're attempting that. If you're just going straight down the middle, you have to be authentic. Further, I think you had to be transparent. I think something that I've been really gratified to see other science video essayists on YouTube do is include sources. I think people thought for the longest time that it was just inconvenient to have citations and sources in YouTube documents, but I've pretty comprehensively shown that that's not the case. You can literally just have a little citation number up in the corner and then links in the description. It can be very nondescript. And the fact, even if people don't actually check that data, it broadcasts that this is it can be trusted. I suppose it's another tying into authentic, but it's being transparent about the data that you're using and the analysis that you've done, effectively treating it almost like a paper, but obviously for a completely different audience. And then lastly, with regards to the comments section, don't get down in the mud. And what I mean by that is, I can't remember where this phrase comes from, but there's the idiom that you should never wrestle with a pig because he will drag you down in the mud and win on experience. So if you do start talking to people on any kind of social media, and particularly when it comes to YouTube comments, you actually only draw attention to a negative viewpoint and misinformation. And whilst you may go into it with the best of intentions, you actually end up boosting their signal significantly. You're not realistically going to be able to change people's minds unless it's a very specific question of, for example, I did a video recently on the climate impact of different foodstuffs and using the analysis from Poor and Nemechek that it was per kilo, and people saying, oh, but what about per kilocalorie? And I did that analysis and linked it in a reply. That's the kind of thing where there's an obvious, route to being able to change somebody's mind. In general, it's only by replying to a bad actor, to somebody who is broadcasting misinformation, only amplifies their signal. You're only getting down in the mud with them, and I just don't think that's a situation you want to find yourself in, really. So just to wrap up quickly, if I had to give 5 brief tips to be very specific on how to engage on YouTube, use the shadow banning and blocked phrases tools liberally. I put liberally misspelled in brackets there because that's one of my blocked terms, liberal, because YouTube's has this great feature where you can add in blocked words, and if a comment contains a blocked word, it just gets removed. And you can also shadow ban people, meaning that they are banned from commenting, but they don't realize it. They're just kind of shouting into the void. They're really great tools, and you should absolutely use them. If you want to understand the format that you are trying to emulate with a Trojan horse video, or frankly, even if you're just doing a straight down the middle of the line video essay, understanding the format is crucial. And in order to understand it, you have to consume a lot of that format. So it's a great excuse to watch a lot of YouTube and a lot of really great content that's out there as a way of furthering your understanding of the format, which will make you make much more engaging content. If I had to give a single production tip, I would say get good audio. People's ears are much more easily offended than their eyes. So if you had to invest in one piece of equipment, invest in a microphone. I have on my website, which is simonoxfphys.com, there's like a whole article of recommended microphones and cameras. Fourth, approach educational filmmaking in exactly the same way that you would approach storytelling. So for those of you that might have kids, that would mean telling it in a way that is compelling, with twists and turns and therefores and buts, rather than just this happened and then this happened and then this happened. Approach it exactly as if it was fiction, and that's the way that you keep people's attention hooked. To me, lecturing and doing outreach is exactly the same as telling a good story, so you should approach them in the same way. Most importantly, though, the final piece of advice would be just make content. If you want to get good at doing something, unfortunately there are no shortcuts. The only way to get good at doing something is just to do that thing over and over and over again. The hardest piece of advice I ever received was that if you want to get good at making videos, your first 100 videos will suck. But you can't make good videos until you get those ones out of the way. You will learn from every mistake that you make. You will improve your content every time you keep experimenting. And you're not going to get better by just imagining a project and piddling it to death in your head. You just got to make stuff. And then you'll realize that you could do a few things better here and there. And then the next thing you make will be better. And so on and so on. And eventually you will, I've been told, be able to make something good. Maybe I'll reach there at some point. That's it. I realized I've probably gone on for longer than I intended. But thank you very much for your attention. Those are my socials on YouTube and Twitter and Twitch. I am trying to do educational streaming on Twitch, but I keep getting sidetracked by just playing video games because it's a bit more fun. But thank you very much for your attention. I hope that this finds everybody in good health. And I realize that a large part of panel discussions normally is the questions that you get to ask. Obviously, we can't do that because this isn't live. But if you would like to ping me an email, I will include, there'll be a link in the description to my email address. Of course, all the socials will be linked down there as well. And if you do have any specific questions, I'd be very happy to answer them. Thank you again for your attention. Thank you to the EGU for giving me this opportunity. I'm sorry I couldn't make it live. Hopefully next year, as long as there's not another pandemic. Okay, thank you.